Hi, my dear students. Today we are going to discuss about the anatomy of brainstem. Okay, so brainstem, why it is so important? Brainstem is important because it contains two main important centers. The two main important centers are the vital centers, which constitute our cardiovascular system, our blood pressure regulating system, and our respiratory system. And another main important center is the reticular activating system. Okay, so the reticular activating system consists of nothing but they are the bundle of nerve fibers and the cells involved in the level of consciousness and act as a gatekeeper for information between sensory system and consciousness. Okay, so usually we used to come across the term like brain death, right? Brain death. So what does it mean? Brain death generally it means like damage to the brainstem itself. Okay, fine. So here you can see in this diagram. See, this is called the brainstem that constitute the midbrain, pons, and the medulla. Fine. See, what is the function of the brainstem? Brainstem generally connects the cerebrum with the spinal cord. Okay. So this is the cerebrum and this is the spinal cord. In between, you can see the brainstem. And the main parts of the brainstem are the midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. Okay. Okay. See, guys, this is very important. This is the brainstem, and this part is the midbrain. This is the uppermost part, and this is the pons, the middle part, and the lower part is the medulla. And in between, you can appreciate in the diagram, this is the midbrain, or it is also called mesencephalic junction, right? So this is the mesencephalic junction, and this is the pons. And between you can see a groove, you can see a horizontal groove between the mesencephalon and the pons. This is called the pontomesencephalic junction. And between the pons and the medulla you can see the pontomedullary junction. Okay, these structures are very important when we revise the main features of, or the external features or the internal features of the parts of the brainstem. So these grooves are very important. Okay, and okay, see in this diagram you can appreciate here the cerebral peduncle. See, I had already told about the brainstem. What is the main function of the brainstem? Brainstem connects the cerebrum with the spinal cord. It acts as a highway between the cerebrum and the spinal cord. So directly it is connecting the cerebrum and it is also connecting the cerebellum. Okay, so it is connected to the cerebrum by cerebral peduncle. Cerebral peduncle is nothing but it's a group of nerve fibers. It's a group of nerve tracts or fibers that see you can see as a striations, right? Few longitudinal striations. So these striations are the cerebral peduncle. So all the nerve fibers, the main information processing, all or the sensory fibers or the motor fibers that is coming from the cerebral cortex passes through the cerebral peduncle. Fine. And here you can see the cerebellar peduncle. The cerebellar peduncle is nothing but, see, there are three cerebellar peduncles. This is the superior cerebellar peduncle, this is the middle cerebellar peduncle, and this is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. These three cerebellar peduncle are the nerve fibers. So peduncle in the sense some group of nerve fibers that will that pass information to the cerebellum, or it is connecting the cerebellum. Okay. Okay. So next we are going to see about the cranial nerve nuclear distribution in the brainstem. See, brainstem houses our cranial nerve nucleus, and from the brainstem there are a few cranial nerves, not like few, except first and second cranial nerve, all the remaining cranial nerve, that is cranial nerve number 3. Cranial nerve number 3 to cranial nerve number 12. So from 3 to 12, all the cranial nerves are housing in the brainstem, or it exit or emerge from the brainstem, and its nucleus is situated inside deep into the brainstem. So we saw the parts of the brainstem, right? The upper part is the midbrain, then the pons, then the medulla. See, in the midbrain, there we can see two nerves. That is the third cranial nerve and the fourth cranial nerve. What is the third cranial nerve? That is the oculomotor nerve. So the oculomotor nerve and the trochlear nerve is seen in the midbrain. Okay. And in the pons, we can see from the fifth to eighth cranial. That is, fifth is the trigeminal nerve, and sixth is the obtuse nerve, then facial nerve, and the vestibulocochlear nerve. That is the eighth nerve. So from 5, 6, 7, 8, these are seen in the pons. Next, in the medulla, there we can see the remaining. What are the remaining nerves? The ninth cranial nerve, 10th cranial nerve, accessory nerve, and the hypoglossal nerve. Okay, so 9, 10, 11, 12 are seen in the medulla. Okay, guys, see, this is the housing of the cranial nerves. So, housing of the cranial nerves in the brainstem. Very beautiful, right? Okay, listen. See, this is the midbrain and this is the pons. Okay, this is midbrain, pons, and this is the medulla. And see this structure, right? This structure is the cerebellar peduncle. And in between the cerebellar peduncle, a depression is there, right? So this is the intercerebellar fossa. Cerebral pedunculaar fossa. So in between both these, see, our cranial nerve, third cranial nerve is emerging medial to this fossa. This is the third cranial nerve. And see, this is the fourth cranial nerve, and this is the only cranial nerve that is emerging from the behind of the midbrain. See, this is the midbrain, right? And this is the fourth cranial nerve. Fourth cranial nerve is emerging from behind the midbrain, and it moves anteriorly. So the third cranial nerve emerging from the middle of the, or on either side of the peduncular fossa, and this fourth cranial nerve is emerging from behind of the midbrain and moves anteriorly. Fine. So third and fourth emerging from the midbrain. Okay, now this is the trigeminal nerve, the largest nerve. So this is the pons. On the lateral aspect of the pons, you know the regions, right? This is the anterior aspect and behind is the posterior aspect. And see, this is the lateral aspects. So on both sides, on the lateral aspect, we can see the trigeminal nerve. So why it is trigeminal? Because it constitutes three. Tri means three and gemini means roots. The three divisions of the trigeminal nerves are what? The ophthalmic, the maxillary, and the mandibular. So these nerves are emerging from the lateral aspect of the pons. Okay, this is the fifth. Then 6, 7, and 8. 6, 7, and 8 is emerging from, see, I had already explained previously that a groove is there. See this groove. This groove is called the pondomedullary junction. So from the pondomedullary junction, cranial nerve number 6, 7, and 8 is emerging. See, this is the cranial nerve number 6. 6 is emerging from the medial aspect. And this is the midline, right? This is the median fissure. And this is the anterior median fissure. So anterior median fissure divides the brainstem into right and left region. Okay. So anterior median fissures divides the brainstem into right and left half, and we can see the cranial nerve number 6 on the medial aspect of the or near to the median fissure. And as we go from medial to lateral, we can see the sixth cranial nerve followed by seventh cranial nerve and the eighth cranial nerve. Okay, then remaining cranial nerves are the 9, 10, 11 and 12. Those are seen in the medulla. Okay, so see, this is the ninth cranial nerve, this is the 10th cranial nerve, and this one is the 11th cranial nerve. So 9, 10, 11, we can medulla oblongata, right? In medulla oblongata, this is the median side, anterior medial fissure. So in the anterior median fissure, on either side you can see a elevation, right? This longitudinal elevation that is seen on either side of this anterior median fissure is known as the pyramid. Okay, and say behind the pyramid you can see an oval shaped elevation that is called the olive. Fine. So this is the pyramid, and this is called a olive. So pyramid and olive. So in between pyramid and olive, we can see the cranial nerve number 12 is emerging. And again, you can see this is the anterior region, this is the lateral region, and behind is the posterior region. So this anterior and the lateral region is separated by, guys, you can notice a median fissure right here. This is the anterior lateral sulcus. Okay, this is lateral region, this is medial region, and this is the anterior lateral sulcus. And behind, this is the lateral and posterior. So this is posterior lateral sulcus. So you can see from the anterior lateral sulcus, cranial nerve number 12 is emerging. From the posterior lateral sulcus, you can see cranial nerve number 9, 10, 11 are emerging. Good. Okay. So all the cranial nerves are covered, right? So except cranial nerve 1 and 2, the remaining cranial nerves, that is the third cranial nerve and fourth cranial nerve is emerging from the midbrain, and fifth cranial nerve and 6, 7, 8 is emerging from the pons, and then from the medulla there is 9, 10, 11 cranial nerves are emerging. Okay, so now we are going to see about, so as I already told, the three main parts of the brainstem, right? From the up, we have the midbrain, then the pons, then we have the medulla. So today's session, I am going to discuss in detail about the medulla oblongata. The medulla, we will see about the external features, the internal features, and the related clinical anatomy. Okay. So medulla oblongata. So first, medulla oblongata, we can see the location. The location of the medulla oblongata is, see here you can see where this is the fossas of the base of the cranial cavity, and this is the anterior cranial fossa, this is the middle cranial fossa, and this is the posterior cranial fossa. So the medulla oblongata is situated or located, or it is seated in the posterior cranial fossa. Okay, this is the posterior cranial fossa, and it occupies the space or infratentorial space. It occupies the infratentorial space. Okay, and it is situated in the lower part of the brainstem, right? See, it is situated in the lower part of the brainstem, and it is extend from the lower border of the pons to the spinal cord, right? See, this is the spinal cord, and this is the pons, this is the upper border, and this is lower border. So you can say where the medulla is located. The medulla oblongata is located where? It is located in the posterior cranial fossa, and it occupies the infratentorial space, and it lies in the anterior part of the posterior cranial fossa and it extends from the lower part of the pons to the spinal cord. Fine. Okay. So these are the so coming to the external features. So external features, as I already told about, see, this is the median fissure. And we have the anterior median fissure and the posterior median fissure in the posterior side. So the anterior surface is always known as the ventral surface, anterior or ventral surface, and posterior surface is also called dorsal surface, posterior or dorsal surface. And there is lateral surface also. Okay, so this is the anterior surface, and in the anterior surface, see this midline is there, no? So this middle line that divides the brainstem into right and left half is known as the anterior median fissure. I already explained that anterior median fissure. At the same, it is posteriorly present as the posterior median fissure. Okay, so in the diagram you can see. Then externally what we can see? And externally we can see again the anterior median fissure is continues down to the spinal cord, and this is the pyramid. This is the pyramid. Okay, and pyramid, and this is the crossing of the pyramidal fibers. You can see little strong, little light striations here, and these striations are nothing but the crossing of the pyramidal fibers. Okay, guys, what is the pyramid? What is called pyramid? The pyramid is nothing but, see, from the cerebral cortex, there are three important tracts are coming. Okay, one is the cerebrospinal tract, then the cerebrobulbar or cerebronuclear tract, then the cerebropondine tract. So this cerebropondine tract, so these three nerve fibers, these three tracts, one is the cerebrospinal, cerebronuclear, and cerebropondine. So these three sets of fibers are emerging from the cerebral cortex, and it passes through the cerebral peduncle. So I had already explained what is cerebral peduncle and what is cerebellar peduncle. So all the information, that is all the fibers that communicate with the brainstem, with the cerebrum via the cerebral peduncle, and the cerebellum is communicating with the brainstem via the cerebellar peduncle, and we saw the cerebellar peduncle is three, that is the superior, medial, and the inferior. So here what happened? Here the three sets of the nerve fibers, the three sets of the nerve fibers from the cerebral cortex. What are the three sets of fibers? The cerebrospinal fibers, the cerebronuclear fiber, and the cerebropondine fibers. So these fibers are passing all the way down via the cerebral peduncle and reaches into the pons, and the cerebropondine fibers will release on the pons, and it will supplies the, or it will passes into the cerebellum. Okay, then remaining, what are the fibers remaining? Cerebrospinal and the cerebronuclear fibers. So these two fibers move downward, and that will form mainly the cerebrospinal. Okay, so that will form the pyramid. Pyramid is nothing but the longitudinal elevation that is seen on either side of the anterior median fissure. So this is called the anterior median fissure. On either side of the anterior median fissure, you can see the pyramid. So this is called the pyramid. And next is the olive. So olive is nothing but this yellow color part is the pyramid. Okay, and this green color region, is called the olive. So olive is nothing but oval shaped elevation. This oval shaped elevation is called olive. Then what are the things we can see? The anterior fissure is continuing here, and then here anterior lateral sulcus. I had already explained the region between the anterior and the lateral region is separated by the anterior lateral sulcus, and the posterior and the lateral region is separated by the posterior lateral sulcus. You can appreciate that also in the diagram. See, this is the pyramid, right? The pyramid, and in between you can see these sulcus. This sulcus is the ventrolateral sulcus, and behind is the posterior lateral sulcus. So these are the external features that we can see on the anterior aspect of the brainstem. So anterior aspect of the brainstem, we can see all these structures, nothing but the anterior median fissure. And what is this blue structure? This blue structure is the pons. Okay, pons. Then the anterior median fissure, then the pyramid, olive, and the anterior median fissure here continues, and the pyramidal fibers here crosses. They cross each other on both the side. They cross to the opposite sides, and we can see two sulcus, the ventrolateral sulcus and the posterior lateral sulcus. Okay, fine. And this is the this I had already told. This is the ventral surface of the medulla. That means the anterior surface of the medulla. What are the structures we can see? The pyramid, the olive, anterior median fissure, the anterior lateral sulcus, posterior lateral sulcus, and the pyramidal decussation. Pyramidal decussation is nothing but the pyramidal fibers cross each other on the opposite side. Okay, they cross each other on the opposite side, and we can see the housing of the cranial nerve. Yes, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So the 9, 10, 11, and 12 cranial nerve also we can see in the ventral aspect of the medulla. Very easy, right? What are the structures on the ventral surface of the medulla? Pyramid, olive, then the sulcus and the fissure. This is a median fissure, and this is the anterior lateral sulcus and the posterior lateral sulcus. And we can see the pyramidal decussation as well as the cranial nerves. Cranial nerve number 9, 10, 11, and 12 cranial nerve. So these are also emerging on the ventral aspect of the medulla. Okay. And see, this is the dorsal surface of the medulla. Don't be scared. This is easy. At least you should remember these two elevations. See here, this is called the posterior median fissure. So you know the anterior median fissure, right? So behind it is the posterior median fissure and posterior median fissure. And on either side of the posterior median fissure, you can see two tubercle. Okay, so these tubercles are the gracile tubercle. This is the gracile tubercle, and the next one, this elevation is the cuneate tubercle. Okay, so remember these two things. This is the gracile tubercle, and this is the cuneate tubercle. See, the term tubercle means what? A protuberance, like a rounded protuberance, or a round or a convex shape protuberance. So these two tubercle continues down. So these tubercle, see, this tubercle continues down as a fasciculus. Fasciculus means what? The term fasciculus, bundle. So the upper portion is like, it is a tubercle. These are the tubercle. And downward, as it moves downward, it will act as a bundle. So first it will be like a tubercle, and as it moves downward, it will form a bundle, or it will form a tract, right? So that is fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis of the corresponding tubercles. See, the cuneate tubercle has the fasciculus cuneatus, and the gracile tubercle has the fasciculus gracilis. So these four terms you should be thorough. Remaining is okay. At least you should be knowing this is the posterior median fissure, and this is the gracile tubercle, and this is the cuneate tubercle, and downward this is the fasciculus cuneatus, and this is the fasciculus gracilis. Then you know the posterior median sulcus, and here again the median sulcus, pons, the inferior cerebellar peduncle, that and all is okay. So only these four structures you should be, at least you should remember these four structure on the dorsal surface of the medulla. Fine. Okay. 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 Now we are going to move to the internal structure of the medulla. And internal structure of the medulla is when we cut the cross sections. So when we cut the cross section at the lower part, the middle part, and the upper part. So we will study the internal structure of the, what are the structure we will see in the lower part when we cut, and middle part and the upper part. So by section, we will cut the medulla, and we are going to see what are the structure inside that. Okay, so I had already told about when we saw about the housing of the cranial nerves in the brainstem. I had already discussed the cranial nerves are emerging on the anterior surface, right? And their nucleus will be concentrated or situated deep into the internally. So that and all we can see here the nucleus of so many nerves and all the tracks, the ascending tracks, the descending tracks, and all those the pyramidal fibers and pyramidal deposition, all those things we can see. And of course, you know the cross section of spinal cord, right? Hmm? The cross section of the spinal cord, we can see what gray matter and white matter. So the same we can see because it is nearer to the spinal cord, no? So we can see the gray matter and white matter. See, guys, now we are going to discuss this part, okay? So we are cutting the brainstem into 1, 2, 3 parts. So now we are going to discuss this session. So this session is the transverse section through the lower medulla, or you can see the transverse section through the pyramidal decussation. So because here is the pyramidal decussation take place, all the pyramidal fibers cross each other here. So here we are going to cut and we are going to see what is present inside that. Fine. Guys, this is a cross section of the spinal cord. As you know, all these things, like this is the gray matter, H-shaped or a butterfly shaped structure. This is the gray matter, and see, this is the white matter, and this is the posterior aspect of the gray matter, and you can see the posterior horn, these two posterior horns, and you can see this is the anterior horns. See, anteriorly, you can see the anterior region and the anterior horn you can see. Or anterior region is also known as the ventral region, right? And posterior region is also known as the dorsal region. So we can see the ventral horn as well as the dorsal horn. So these two are the ventral horns, and these two are the dorsal horns. Okay. Okay. Guys, don't be scared by seeing this diagram. This is very easy if you understand and learn the structures. Okay. See, now we are going to see the medulla at the level of the pyramidal decussation or the lower level. Lower level. Okay. See. And see, almost because the lower level is continuing as a spinal cord. So all the structures will be similar to that of the spinal cord, or some similarity we can see. So what happened means, see here you can appreciate here the posterior aspect, the posterior column and the posterior horn. This is the posterior horn. But see here, the posterior aspect now, that the posterior column we saw in the spinal cord is now changed into, from the posterior aspect, see, there is elevations. So on the posterior aspect are folded into two elevations. See, in the spinal cord, posterior aspect was like a U shape, right? See here in the medulla, in the lower part of the medulla, this posterior aspect is folded into two elevation on either side. What are these two elevation called? These two elevation are nothing but this is the nucleus gracilis and this is the nucleus cuneatus. And guys, you should compare these features with the external feature also. See here, this is the anterior region. This is the anterior aspect, and this is the posterior aspect. Okay, so posterior in the dorsal surface, what are the external features we saw? In the dorsal surface, we saw the tubercles, right? The cunator tubercle and the gracilis tubercle. That I had already told that was a protuberance. So that protuberance is due to this nucleus. See, this is the nucleus gracilis and this is the nucleus cunatus. These two nucleus. And here, these two tract, these are the corresponding tract. This is the fasciculus gracilis and this is the fasciculus cuneatus, the corresponding tract. So these are the ascending tracts, okay? So these are nothing but the nucleus and the corresponding tract, ascending tracts we can see on either side. This is the nucleus gracilis cuneatus and their fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus tracts we can see in the posterior column. And see a little posterior laterally, see what is this? In the spinal cord we saw this as a posterior horn. Now this posterior horn is here converted into what? The spinal nucleus. This is the spinal nucleus, and you can appreciate a capping, right? See this, a capping seen above the spinal nucleus is called the tract of trigeminal nucleus. So this is the spinal nucleus, and above we can see the tract of trigeminal nucleus. Okay. So what are the structures we saw? This is the nucleus gracilis, and this is the nucleus cuneatus, and this is the spinal nucleus, and this capping is called tract of trigeminal nuclei. Okay. And what are these tracts? These tracts are called fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus. So we saw on the posterior aspect these two foldings. These two foldings are the two nucleus, that is gracilis cuneatus, and this is spinal nuclei, and this capping is called the tract of trigeminal nuclei. Okay, and what is this? This is the central canal through which the CSF flows. Okay, now see in the lateral aspect. See in the lateral aspect, you can see the dorsospinocerebral tracts. This is the dorsospinocerebral tract, and these are the spinocerebellar tract. See, this is the dorsal aspect or the posterior aspect, and this is the ventral aspect. So, in the ventral aspect, you can see the ventral spinocerebellar tract, and this is the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, and this is more laterally. So, this is the lateral spinothalamic tract. Okay, this light green color, this tract that is seen in the lateral aspect. This is the lateral spinothalamic tract, and this one is the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. So these three tracts, these are also the ascending tracts that is seen laterally. Okay. Now what is this anteriorly? Anterior aspect, the pyramid. This is a pyramid, and the crossing this central region where the pyramidal fibers cross each other or cross and move to the opposite side is called the pyramidal decussation. So this is a pyramidal decussation. So the pyramidal fibers cross over each other and move more laterally and on the posterior aspect. So posterior laterally, and this here it forms the lateral corticospinal tract. As the name indicate, the corticospinal tract, I had already told, the corticospinal tract are coming from the cerebral cortex. So from the cerebral cortex, three sets of nerve fibers are emerging. They are the corticospinal tract, the corticonuclear, and the corticopondine. And the corticopondine tract lies in the pons, and it supplies or it passes to the cerebellum, and the remaining corticospinal and the corticonuclear is moving downward and reaches into the pyramid, and in the pyramid it crosses each other and it moves more posteriorly and laterally, and here see, here it will form the lateral corticospinal tract. Okay, and again you can see in the anterior horn, you can see the two nucleus. So the nucleus of the accessory cranial nerve and the supraspinal nucleus of the C1 spinal nerve. These are the two nucleus. One is the nucleus of the 11th cranial nerve, and this is the nucleus of the first cervical C1 spinal nerve. So these two nucleus also you can see here. And again, what is this net-like structure? These are called the reticular activating system. This reticular activating system is mainly involved in the sensory perception as well as the consciousness. Okay, so the reticular activating system. We can see all the region. All the region we can see is reticular activating system. Okay, so this is the TS or the transverse section of the medulla at the level of the pyramidal decussation. So what are the structure we can see at the level of the pyramidal decussation? This is the ascending tracts. See, first this is the nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus. This is a spinal nuclei, and above a capping is called the nucleus tract of the trigeminae. And again this fascicular gracilis, and this is a fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, and again this lateral corticospinal tract you can see, and these are the ascending tracts. What are the ascending tracts? And these lateral corticospinal tracts are the descending tracts. Okay. Then in the pyramid, we can see the corticospinal tract. So from the pyramid, it is crossing over and moves laterally, and there it will form the corticospinal tracts. So these structures are seen at the pyramidal level. Okay. So next, and this is the TS or transverse section of the medulla at the level of the sensory decussation. See here, see here we can see this elevation, no? These small foldings, this molar elevation now separate. See, you imagine like we are making a cut through this. Okay, then what we will get? A separate structure, right? A separate nucleus. The same thing we can see here. See here, see this one. This one is a sensory nucleus. Okay. This is the nucleus gracilis. This is nucleus cuneatus. And this is the spinal nucleus, and above this capping remains same. That is what the tract of the trigeminal nuclei. So this is same as like this is the nucleus gracilis. Here also in this structure, in the lower level also we saw this nucleus gracilis, cuneatus, spinal nucleus, and above this capping tract of trigeminal nuclei. So same we can see here. Okay, cuneatus, gracilis, and the spinal nuclei and the capping. And the important feature of this level is the formation of the medial lemniscus. Okay, the medial lemniscus is very important for again the sensory perception, motor function, consciousness, motivation, everything. So all the motor proprioception, vibration, touch, all the sensory perception. This is very important structure. How it is formed? We can see here the nucleus gracilis, and this is the nucleus cuneatus. So from the nucleus cuneatus and the nucleus gracilis, the second order neurons emerging from these and move more anteriorly, and here it crosses each other. Okay, so the second order fibers emerging from this nucleus, from nucleus cuneatus and nucleus gracilis, move little anteriorly and cross each other below the behind the pyramid. Here it cross each other, and here it will forms the medial lemniscus. Okay, okay. And these second order fibers that emerging from this nucleus is called the internal arcuate fibers. Okay, these are called the internal arcuate fibers. These are the sensory fibers that cross each other and forms the medial lemniscus. And this is known as the sensory decussation. So we will tell this section as this transverse section through the middle region of the medulla. We will say as this is the level of the sensory decussation. So what is the sensory decussation? Sensory decussation is nothing but the formation of the medial lemniscus. So where this medial lemniscus is formed? This medial lemniscus is how it is formed. The medial lemniscus is formed from the second order fibers, second order neuron fibers that is emerging from the nucleus gracilis and the nucleus cuneatus, and it moves anteriorly and cross each other. Understood? Okay, then we can see what is this? This is the spinal nuclei and the capping, the same as we saw in the lower level of the medulla. Then the same, see this lateral region. We can see all this cerebellar, spinocerebellar tract. This is the dorsal side, no? So dorsal cerebellar tract, and this is the anterior side, anterior cerebellar tract. So these tract, and this is the laterospinothalamic tract. So these are same like as it is we saw in the lower level. And again you can see the reticular formation. And then one more important structure you can see above the medial lemniscus. See, do I like red nucleus? So this I like to structure you can appreciate above the medial lemniscus, right? So these are called the medial longitudinal fasciculus. So these are the medial longitudinal fasciculus, and that is also very important in the sensory perception and the conscious level. Okay, and the medial longitudinal fascicula contains certain nucleus of the nerves, and above this, see here you can see See, this is the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, and here you can see the vagus, the dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus, and here down you can see the hypoglossal nerve nucleus. So these are the nucleus of the cranial nerves. Okay, this tractus solitarius, this is the vagus nerve nucleus, and this is the hypoglossal nerve nucleus. Okay, and the nucleus tractus solitarius also contains fibers or for the vagus nerve. So vagus nerve also have the tractus solitarius. Okay, so these three nucleus you can appreciate, and again the central canal you can see. So mainly in this session through the middle of the medulla, you can appreciate the main important feature is the formation of the medial lemniscus. Then you can see the few nucleus of the cranial nerve. Then the important structure is this thing, MLF, the medial longitudinal fasciculus. This is the MLF, medial longitudinal fasciculus, and this is the reticular formation. Okay. Okay. Now we are going to see the third session. The third session is at the level of the oli. So that is the third part is the upper part that is just open. It is open to the lower border of the pons. So this is the third part, and you can see here this is opened to the ventricles. Okay, this is opened, and you imagine like, see here we saw this gray matter, this small gray matter, no, this small apple-like structure. So this structure you imagine like we are pushing from anterior. Here we are pushing from anteriorly and moving to the posterior region. What we can see here. See, all these nucleus are spread in the posterior region. See, what is this? Yeah, the dorsal cochlear nucleus, the vestibular nucleus. And you can see here the hypoglossal nerve nucleus. And this is the dorsal motor, the vagus nucleus, and the nucleus of ambicus. See, all the nucleus are spreaded along this side. And what about the MLF? The MLF also moved more posteriorly or more dorsally. It moved most posteriorly. And again, this medial lemniscus is also a little bit elongated. And the one more feature is this is the tectospinal and the rubrospinal tract. Actually, this tectospinal and rubrospinal tract, we can see all the level, but in this level, we can see more visible. In this level only, we can see more, it is more appreciable in this level. So this is the tectospinal and rubrospinal. Okay, and this is the medial lemniscus. Remaining everything is same. See here the lateral aspect, we can see the ascending tracts, the spinocerebellar tracts, the dorsospinocerebellar tracts, and the ventral spinocerebellar tract. Again, we can see the reticular formation. See, this is the reticular formation, and see it is like a small egg-shaped. See, this is a spinal nucleus, and you can see the capping. This capping, see the tractus of the trigeminal nuclei, that is also there. So everything is spreaded more laterally and posteriorly. Okay, this is very important. The importance of this structure is the tectospinal and the rubrospinal. Remaining everything nucleus and all we can see in the middle part also, but this is here it had spread more posteriorly and more laterally. Okay. Okay, so once again we will revise. See, this is the lower level. Lower level, what the cross section along the lower level, what the things we can see? The nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, and the fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, and this is the spinal nuclei, and this capping is called the tract of the trigeminal nuclei. And of course, we can see the pyramidal decussation. Pyramidal decussation, and after the crossing over of the pyramidal fibers, it will form the lateral corticospinal tract. Then we can see the reticular formation and the ascending tracts. Okay. Then at the sensory deposition, the formation of the medial lemniscus is very important. That is formed from the second order neurons emerging from the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus cross each other to form the medius lemniscus, and above this is called the MLF, and few nucleus is situated inside this also. And see, this is the gray matter. It houses the nucleus of the tractus solitarius and the vagus nerve nucleus and the nucleus of the hypoglossal nerve. Okay. And this is the central canal. Now, this central canal we saw in the first session, the lower part and the middle part, but coming to the upper part, we can see because the central canal is open up into the fourth ventricle because that is open up. It moved behind and it opened up as a fourth ventricle. So this is that opened part. This is opened, okay, and this nucleus are arranged along the posterior aspect. Fine. This is again the reticular formation, and this is the medial lemniscus, and this is the pyramid, and you can see the rectospinal and tectospinal and the rubrospinal. Okay, guys. Okay. Okay, students. Next, we are going to see about the blood supply. The blood supply, here you can appreciate in this diagram, the posterior inferior cerebellar region. This posterior inferior cerebellar region is supplied by the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. And this, see, actually, mainly there is two arteries, the anterior spinal artery and the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. This is the major supply, the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. See, this is the major supply. And this is also the anterior spinal artery, also major supply. And in between these two, the posterior spinal artery supplies these part. Okay, this posterior and the posterior part. And here the direct branches from the vertebral artery supplies a little bit anterolateral region. So mainly the blood supply of the middle brainstem is the anterior spinal artery and the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and few supply from the posterior spinal artery and the direct branches of the vertebral artery. Okay. Okay, now coming to the clinical syndromes of the medulla. Okay. The clinical syndromes are mainly the medial medullary syndrome. In the diagram, you can appreciate the medial medullary syndrome is caused by the blockage of the anterior spinal artery. So the blockage of the anterior spinal artery can lead to the medial medullary syndrome. And now we see what are the features. The features are the contralateral hemiplegia. What is ipsilateral and contralateral? Ipsilateral is on the affected side, same side, and contralateral is on the opposite side. Okay, so contralateral hemiplegia is it will damage the pyramid, and there is loss of vibration and position sense, damage to the medial lemniscus, and ipsilaterally we can see the tongue paralysis. The tongue paralysis we can see ipsilaterally, that is the 12th cranial nerve is affected. Okay, these are the diagram you can see. It is mainly the medial medullary syndrome means it is mainly due to the blockage of the anterior spinal artery, and the features are the contralateral hemiplegia and loss of vibration and position sense. It is due to the damage of the medial lemniscus. As I had already told, the main function is the proprioception, right? The medial lemniscus, the main because it is formed by the it is formed at the level of the sensory deposition, so it is associated with the proprioception. So that is damaged here. So there is loss of vibration and position sense. And then we can see the ipsilateral tongue paralysis on the same side, the affected side. Tongue will be paralyzed because the anterior spinal artery supplies all these structures. Okay? So this will be damaged. And next is the lateral medullary syndrome. So medial medullary syndrome and lateral medullary syndrome. So lateral medullary syndrome is the Wallenberg syndrome. This is caused by the blockage of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. As I had already told, no, the main blood supply. The main blood supply are the anterior spinal artery and the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So if any blockage will lead to the proper supply of the blood won't be there. So if proper blood supply is not there means it will affect, right? because proper nutrition or proper blood supply is not reaching, so those structures will be damaged without getting the proper oxygen. So that is damaged and there will be infect and other complications. So here the lateral medullary syndrome is due to the blockage of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and the features include the ipsilateral, the same side paralysis of the muscles of soft palate, pharynx, and larynx, because it will damage the nucleus ambiguous, because the posterior inferior cerebellar artery supplies the nucleus ambiguous. Okay, posterior inferior cerebellar artery supplies the nucleus ambiguous. So this ipsilateral paralysis of the muscles of soft palate, pharynx, and larynx will get affected. Fine. Then again, there will be loss of pain and temperature. Okay, so loss of pain and temperature, because on the face we can see on the same side of the face there will be that is due to the damage to the spinal trigeminal nuclei, and in the body we can see contralaterally. See, in the there is loss of pain and temperature, but it will be different in the face and the body. In the face, on the same side we can see. If damage is on the right side, damage is on the left side, we can see on the left side itself. On the face, left side itself, we can see the uh, lesion, or we can there will be like loss of pain and temperature, and body is affected on the opposite side. So face we can see in the same side of the face is affected, and in the body opposite side of the body is affected. So that is the loss of pain and temperature. So in the face it is ipsilateral, there is damage because of the damage to the spinal trigeminal nucleus or tract, and there will be again due to the damage of the lateral spinothalamic tract, the body will be affected. There will be loss of pain and temperature on the contralateral side of the body. Okay, then because of the involvement of the vestibular nuclei, there will be giddiness and ataxia because of the damage to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So there will be ataxia and there will be Horner syndrome. Horner syndrome is the characterized by ptosis, enophthalmosis, meiosis, and anhidrosis. So these are the features of the Horner syndrome. Okay, Horner syndrome is characterized by ptosis, enophthalmos, meiosis, and anhidrosis. That is due to the damage to the sympathetic fibers. Okay, next is, so what is the lateral medullary syndrome? Lateral medullary syndrome is the Wallenberg syndrome is caused due to the blockage of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and the main features are the ipsilateral paralysis of the muscles of soft palate, pharynx, and larynx. That is due to the damage of the nucleus ambiguous. Then loss of pain and temperature. If the face means on the same side and the body on the opposite side. Okay, then patient will be having giddiness. It is due to the involvement of the vestibular nuclei, and due to the damage of the inferior cerebellar peduncle, there will be ataxia and the Horner syndrome. Horner syndrome is characterized by ptosis, enophthalmosis, meiosis, and anhidrosis. Okay, so here you can see due to stroke, lateral part of the medulla oblongata is affected because of the occlusion of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So there will be, see here, the loss of pain and temperature of the ipsilateral face, and this is the loss of pain and temperature of the contralateral arm and legs. And Horner syndrome, ptosis, anhidrosis, and meiosis. Okay, students, with this said, I'm ending this session. So next session we will be discussing about the next part of the brainstem. What is the next part of the brainstem? That is the pons and the midbrain. Okay, that is two small sections. So we will discuss in a single session. So today's session, what are the things we saw? We saw mainly about the brainstem and its part. Then we saw about the external features and few internal features. Internal features we divided into three sessions: at the level of the pyramidal decussation, at the level of the sensory decussation, and at the level of the olive. Okay. Then we saw about the clinical anatomy. In the clinically, we saw about the medial medullary syndrome and the lateral medullary syndrome. Okay. By this session, we are ending. Okay. Thank you.